Bueno, we're going to begin. I'm so I haven't been this excited. Truly, I haven't been this excited since I was a kid, waiting for the Shriners Circuits to come to town at the Coliseum back then. You know, some of you remember the Coliseum. It was fun. Bueno, buenas tardes. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you esta tarde. My name is Jose Aranda, and I'm an associate professor of Chicano literature in the departments of English and Hispanic Studies. On behalf of Rice University, its Board of Trustees, President David Lebrun, Provost George McClellan, faculty, staff, and students, I welcome you to a town hall meeting sponsored by the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino. Tonight, you will learn about efforts that have been underway for over 5 years to establish a museum that reflects our diverse Latino and Latina histories in this country for all to appreciate. Just as important, the current plan is to have the museum open on the National Mall and to be curated by the Smithsonian. In other words, this museum dedicated to the American Latino will be at the heart of our nation's capital. It will join the other museums of the National Mall, educating not only U.S. citizens, but all who visit Washington, D.C., all who want to learn about this country's past, and all who want to glimpse something of its future. And indeed, as much as this museum, when it becomes a reality that will take all our efforts to create, it will commemorate and memorialize, but it would also signal proudly and loudly our future. Because our future is Latinos, Latinas, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, Cuban Americans, Dominicanos, Tejanos, Chicanos, Chicanas, etc., etc. It's very, very bright. We need to create this museum to make concrete, once and for all, what we have always known, that we are Americans too. That our foremothers and forefathers also died at the Alamo, and the Civil War, and the Spanish-American War, and World War I, and World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and today our fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers in Afghanistan. But also that we built this nation, from the agricultural fields to the mines, from the railroads to the steel mills, from fishing boats to canneries, from the freeways of Los Angeles to our buildings here at Rice University. And we need this museum too because we have also grown, and not just in size. There used to be a time when our communities were looked down upon because we speak no English. But that is no longer true, and it hasn't been true for a very long time. Our communities speak many languages. We speak Chinese, we speak French, we speak German, we speak Nahuatl, we speak Quechua, but we also speak medicine. We speak mathematics, we speak computer science, we speak as elected officials, we speak as educators, we speak as entertainers, we speak as world-class athletes. This is who we are, and this is what our museum will reflect. And every day when it opens, visitors will be greeted with our voices, our music, our foods, our customs, our faces. And when it closes at night, the last children leaving will be full of conversation, talking to each other, saying, "That was brave of so-and-so. That was a hard time back then, Mama, wasn't it? When did we immigrate? I didn't know Latinas served during World War II. I didn't know that the last battle of the Civil War was fought near Brownsville, Union Mexicanos fighting against Confederate Mexicanos." While other children will be deep in thought, thinking to themselves, "I want to do that. I want to be her. I want to be him. I want to be more." So we must work for the creation of this museum, and we must work very hard so that it might speak for us, so that it might speak familia y hogar, lucha y fe, and most importantly, that it may speak justicia para todos, because this is who we are, and this is our Latino museum. Now I have the great pleasure of introducing I told you I was excited. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Mayor Pro-Tem Ed Gonzalez. Councilmember Ed Gonzalez serves as Mayor Pro-Tem for the City of Houston. He has served as Mayor Pro-Tem since 2012 when he was appointed by the mayor and confirmed by his peers in the Houston City Council. A native-born Houstonian and lifelong resident of District H, Ed was first elected to serve on Houston City Council in 2009. His mother and father were business owners in District H for over 30 years. His family represents the American dream. While Councilmember Gonzalez's father could not read and write as an adult, he made sure that his son had every opportunity to achieve a higher education. Today, Councilmember Gonzalez holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston downtown and a master's degree from the University of St. Thomas.
Thank you so much. And let's hear it up again. What a wonderful introduction to this entire program, laying out the history. Bienvenidos, welcome everyone. It's great to be here among so many distinguished guests, and definitely don't want to introduce anyone because everyone here is a VIP and a distinguished member in our community, so don't want to leave anyone out, but there's just a who's who of the Latino community here in Houston, so it's great to see everyone here. I want to thank Rice University for hosting, in particular Mr. David Medina for doing such an amazing job. I think it's important to point out that this is a collaboration between Rice University and the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latinos. So great to see the collaboration as well. And glad to know that this is the first town hall of its kind for this effort. So glad to see that Houston's been selected. We'll be the only city in Texas, actually, that will host this type of event. So thank you very much to the organizers as well for choosing Houston, Texas to host this event. Thank you as well for that. I will not go too much into the history. I think it's already been laid out, but as a native Houstonian, I know very well, as many of you, the rich history of our community. And our community now stands as the majority here in Houston, and our future is very bright. We see it every day. We see it in our children. We see it in business. Just this past weekend, I spoke at a commencement speech. I gave a commencement speech. What an honor. Very nerve-wracking, but spoke about my dad not being able to read and write, but myself growing up in Houston, and for him to be able to have a son that could grow up and serve on Houston City Council and be able to deliver a commencement speech to thousands of people in the crowd and hundreds, many of our young Latinos graduated from college. What a tremendous honor. But that's just one story of many. Each one of you could go and deliver a similar speech speaking to that history. And I think it's important to note, even here in our own history, from the beginning of the Mexican Americans that moved into the city in the turn of the century and started laying roots in neighborhoods such as Segundo Barrio, Second Ward, that I'm proud to represent on Houston City Council. And hearing stories from my parents that came from Corpus Christi and learning about the beginnings of LULAC and the civil rights movement and the impacts of some of those cases on the education system and the GI Forum and how they came into place and how they delivered to the Latino community, the Mexican American community. So our story is very rich and our future is very bright, but we must not forget where we came from, and we must make sure that those stories are being told to others. It's funny because I could drive around the city now and areas, and some of you that have been around a while may know, Cine Ritz, the Ritz Theater on Main Street, showing Mexican movies. It's not there anymore. Granada on Jensen, it's not there anymore. Epson Drive-In, any of y'all remember that? Mexican movies. It's not there anymore. A lot of our history's gone, and to our younger generation, unless it's told again, it'll be forgotten. So we're very proud of our local history here, but we also know that in the American story, it's very rich with many stories from contributions from our community and many more that we haven't even heard about, but that must be told. So very supportive of this effort. Want to see what we could all do to lend a hand to this amazing effort and look forward to seeing it come to fruition. We've got a very distinguished panel that we're going to be hearing from, and also ways for each and every one of you to get involved in this, the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino. So enjoy the evening. Thank you for your presence, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of our history.
Now I also have the pleasure of introducing Estuardo Rodriguez. Estuardo Rodriguez is a principal of the Rabin Group, a public affairs consulting firm in Washington, D.C. He consults both nonprofit and corporate clients on media and communication strategies targeted to Hispanic communities. A commentator and consultant on Democratic and Hispanic issues, Estuardo has appeared on CNN, CNN en Español, National and Local Univision and Telemundo. He also serves the U.S. Department of State as an independent political analyst in Latin America, most recently in Chile and Spain. Estuardo has been the director of the Friends of the American Latino Museum since 2005. As director, he oversees the communications, advocacy, and community relations components of the campaign. Estuardo, where is he? There he is.
So the best part is that your opening remarks really set the stage, so it saves us so much time, and we could get into this conversation. I will say a couple of things about myself and the Rabin Group. In 2004, the founder of our firm, Robert Rabin, was a moderator for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus's Legislative Conference, a panel to discuss this very issue, legislation to create a commission to study the viability of an American Latino museum. Once that panel conversation was done, and understanding that this was a total bipartisan effort between Congressman Javier Becerra and Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, Robert turned to me and said, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't we help them do this?" And I said, "Sure," and almost 9 years later, we're still at this. It's been a labor of love and a pro bono effort as well. So donations and checks are taken as you leave. But it's really been an incredible work that has seen a number of people in my firm helping out. And with that, I will point out two of the individuals who really have helped move forward with David here at Rice. Francela Chinchilla, who's here at the left, and Gabi Huesca back there. They're wonderful. They're wonderful. I have to do that in case anything goes wrong. You can. No, I'm kidding. Nothing goes wrong with them working on this. So it's been almost 9 years now that we've been working on this, and it truly has been a project where we have gone from state to state to annual conferences, convenings, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, LULAC, NCLR, anybody that will give us a few minutes to talk about this effort. And our goal being to educate our community, not only on the importance of an American Latino Museum, but also about our shared American history. I was mentioning earlier today, I could host this town hall in Miami, I could host this in New York City or in Los Angeles, and I bet you, I guarantee that we would have different conversations in each city because of how diverse our community is, how our contributions have ranged from one extreme to the other in science, math, our armed services, all of our contributions, really, they range across the board, and so few of us understand that. So again, to Professor Aranda's opening remarks, I think he presented it very well, how complex, diverse, and beautiful our culture and our community is. So with that, we have a wonderful and distinguished panel that I think you all agree is also diverse in their experiences, in their contributions to our American society. And with that, I think the best panel that we can have to pose this question of why an American Latino Museum? How can we bring together the story of the American Latino from Florida, Texas, California, New York, and other areas, and bring all of those stories together in one museum? I think it's a huge challenge, and I think we'll continue to argue about whether or not we should say Hispanic, Latino, or Chicano, but we'll leave all those conversations for later and really get into what this museum means for all of us. So let me start by introducing our first panelist, a distinguished leader in STEM. Dr. Richard Tapia is the Maxfield Oshman Professor in Engineering and the Director of the Center for Excellence and Equity in Education. His work has brought Rice national recognition for their educational outreach programs. As Director of the Center, Dr. Tapia has directed or co-directed more underrepresented minority and women doctoral students in mathematics than anyone else in the nation. Among his many accolades, Dr. Tapia was awarded the National Medal of Science by President Barack Obama in 2011. Dr. Tapia, please join us up here. Maggie Rivas-Rodriguez is an associate professor at the School of Journalism at University of Texas at Austin. While studying at the University of Texas at Austin, she worked at a Spanish-language radio station where she discovered her love of journalism. Dr. Rivas-Rodriguez founded the Voces Oral History Project, which has recorded interviews across the country with over 900 Latinos from World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War generations. She has been honored with the National Council of La Raza's Ruben Salazar Award for Communication. Dr. Rivas-Rodriguez, please join us. Eduardo Diaz is the director of the Smithsonian Latino Center. As director, he has spearheaded several exhibitions, including Cerámica de los Ancestors, Central America's Past Revealed, which is currently on view at the National Museum of the American Indian. Diaz also served as an advisor to the Smithsonian's Secretary and Undersecretary for History, Art, and Culture, and to Congress and government agencies on cultural development issues in Latino communities in the country. Prior to his current position, Diaz was the executive director for the Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque, the largest Latino cultural center in the country. Please join us, Dr. Eduardo Diaz. Marie Theresa Hernandez is the founding director of Jewish Studies at the University of Houston. She's an associate professor of the World Cultures and Literatures program. During her time at the University of Houston, she has taught classes on narrative and ethnography, Mexican-American literature, and much more. In 2010, she was named the first participant in the University of Houston Presidential Fellows Program, a program that aims to groom faculty for leadership opportunities in higher education. Please join us. So with that, we're going to set the stage with a little video presentation. We have had a great partnership with WETA, the PBS affiliate in Washington, D.C. They are going to launch this fall a program, a 10-hour series called Latino Americans. It's a landmark 6-hour documentary featuring interviews with nearly 100 Latinos and more than 500 years of history. So in learning more about this program, we asked them to share with us a couple of clips, which we have used at various gatherings around the country, and they have given us a small segment that I think will help us set the stage for our conversation. So let's get started with that.
Mexican Texans, Tejanos, were also chafing under the rule of Mexico City, 900 miles away. Prominent among them was Juan Seguin, a third-generation Tejano whose family traced its roots in San Antonio to the earliest settlements in 1712.
Juan Seguin, very early on in the 1830s, already is starting to identify himself as someone else other than a Mexicano, as a Tejano, as a member of an independent republic. He has a conflicted identity. He calls himself John Seguin.
Seguin's father, Erasmo, San Antonio's postmaster, had personally conducted Stephen Austin across the Texas border in 1821.
Erasmo and Juan Seguin see Anglo-American settlement in Texas as important to the development of this frontier outlying part of Mexico that isn't able to get the resources from Mexico City to properly develop the region. The Tejanos felt that government, which left decisions in their own hands, was vital to the progress of Texas. And Anglo-Americans who had grown up with the tradition of strong personal rights also wanted a strong local government.
When in 1834, Mexico's new president Antonio Lopez Santa Anna dissolved the Congress to rule all Mexico with an iron hand, Texans and Tejanos united in opposition. In the fall of 1835, they rose in open rebellion. Santa Anna led an army of thousands across the Rio Grande to put down the revolt.
It's funny how my students, I have to remind my students that, they think sometimes that Santana invaded the United States. And I have to disabuse them of that, saying, well, wait a minute, no. Santana was marching into what was still Mexico.
So that's a great little clip to start off with, because he makes a valid point of what was really truly the United States back then and how that turned into what we know today. So let me get started with our panel and get some reactions to that clip as we begin this conversation. I want to underscore what we hope will be a conversation about not just this, what we've seen, but how each one of these distinguished panelists view this concept of an American Latino museum. So, Dr. Tapia, if I could start with you.
Well, I think it's important because my mother came from Chihuahua. That means she was incredibly proud.
Let me make sure the microphone is on there.
Okay, so my mother came from Chihuahua. You're going to tell me when to stop, because
I work with Congress members, so I'm happy to tell you to stop.
So the issue is pride. My mother, as she raised us in Los Angeles, she would say, be proud. But Mom, they won't let us be proud. They keep putting us down. They keep putting us back. And she'll say, be, and she fought for the pride. So the museum, we have to promote pride among ourselves. We have to promote the feeling that we belong in these disciplines. We belong there, and we are proud people. We also have to, that's for inside. From the other side is promote credibility, that we have given to this country, we are an important part of the country, and that we will continue to do so, that we're of value. Whenever I'm on a national committee, I don't want to just say I give to the committee, but I want them at the end to say, Richard Tapia, with his background as Latino, okay, born in this country, I'm not Mexican, my mother was Mexican, my father was Mexican, I'm Chicano if you wish, okay, but that I have something to offer and of great value. So the best statement they can make to me at the end is, Richard Tapia was a valuable member of this committee because of his understanding of all these issues, okay? Pride. We fight for pride. Should I stop?
That's a good place to stop.
Okay.
That's it.
I guess one couple of things I'd like to say. I'm here kind of representing the National Park Service. A couple of years ago, Ken Salazar was the Secretary of the Interior, and he is one of those wonderful Latinos who's not content just to have made it, but when he makes it, wherever he goes, he always ensures that there's there's more awareness of the Latino contribution. So he put together a group of Latino scholars, and I was part of that panel. What we did, we sat in a hotel room and we figured out, how are you going to tell the story of the Latino community nationally? Because there's not enough National Park Services, there's not enough historical sites that are recognized by the National Park Service. So we put together a big theme study and got wonderful, like the leading scholars in all the different areas. There's some flyers that I left out here in front to contribute on a very, very short schedule. The point is this. I think we are now at a point where we have more of a critical mass of people who are in positions to be able to use their clout to make a greater inclusion for Latinos. And Latinos get it. We've always gotten it. We've always gotten that our stories are important, and our stories are important to include in the national historical narrative. The other hat that I wear is I've been doing this Voces Oral History project. We started in 1999, and in 1999, I came to Houston and did a little training session. One of the people at that training session was Paul Cepeda, who's sitting over here, who had 4 brothers in World War II. He interviewed his 3 surviving brothers at the time. The point is this, I never had to talk people into it. They immediately understood that the Latino contributions to World War II had really not been given sufficient credit. And so there was no question. They were like, what can I do? How can I do this? And we've never had to convince people, persuade them why this is important. They get it. So I think that this is just one more way that here we have now this wonderful opportunity to have all of the Latino experience housed in one place and recognized in one place, because there's lots of different efforts, and you're going to find out there's lots of efforts all over the country of people doing local efforts to make sure that their contributions to their communities, their states, their nation are not forgotten. What we don't have, and what this is going to be, is that central place where we can all meet and learn a little bit about what's going on in different parts of the country. It's extremely exciting, and everybody who's involved in it is really lending their best efforts, their best expertise. And thank you for the Raven Group for doing this for free, because that's a huge thing. To be able to have that level of skill is an amazing and really important part of this. So that's all I've got.
And since you did call out Mr. Cepeda, thank you to you and your family for your sacrifices, Mr. Cepeda. Eduardo, te toca.
Gracias, Estuardo. Muy buenas noches a todos. Gracias por su presencia. Nos honran realmente con la presencia. I guess the way I would respond to the video is, as David Montejano, the professor from UC Berkeley, was talking, one of the things that was conjured up in my head was the whole issue of hidden histories or parts of our history that we're not very familiar with. And I think part of the job at the Smithsonian, at the Latino Center in particular, is now the strategy of embedding curators, Latino and Latina curators, in various units of the Smithsonian, so that the presence there, the curatorial presence, is there to unlock these untold histories, or to bring them to the forefront. So at the Smithsonian, you know, we're very, very committed right now to building the kind of necessary infrastructure that's necessary. In the museum world, it is the curators who are sort of these demigods. You know, they're the ones that determine where the research is done, what's researched, what is developed as an exhibition. The exhibition that Estuardo mentioned, Cerámica de los Ancestros, which has to do with the pre-Columbian legacies of Central America, was 3 years in the making, and it was only because we had Latino curators that were dedicated to this project, and the fact, of course, that the National Museum of the American Indian, we have 12,000 objects, ceramic objects of pre-Columbian Central American derivation. So we have a lot of stuff, we have a lot of content, and so the strategy at the Smithsonian is to now have the people in place, particularly at the curatorial level, to tell these untold and undertold, if you will, histories across the board, whether it's in music, whether it's in the area of sciences, innovation, culture specifically, or generally, I should say, or art. So we're going to move forward with this initiative to embed curators, to also bring on educators, to bring on people who are involved with exhibition design. The web presence for us is huge. We're in Washington, D.C. You know, it's unlikely. I was at Talento Bilingüe de Houston earlier today, an organization that I know well. And, you know, there's not a lot of folks that live on Navigation and Second Ward that are going to make it to the National Mall. It's just not going to happen. Everyone in this audience knows that. So what do we do to serve these audiences that are not going to have the opportunity to travel to Washington? We have a responsibility to be here in Houston, as we are today, but to deliver services externally to Washington, as well as establishing a strong virtual presence. Everything that we do has to be thought through in a way that ensures the greatest outreach possible. Thank you.
Professor Hernandez.
I find it quite interesting and exciting that Eduardo mentions the hidden histories, because that is what I do. I write about hidden histories. In my first book, it's titled Delirio, the Fantastic, the Real, the Demonic and the Real, the Buried History of Nuevo León. My second book is Cemeteries of Ambivalent Desire, Unearthing Narratives from a Texas Graveyard. So that is what I do, and I just think it's really kind of fascinating that I'm finding myself here on this panel. One of the things I'm thinking about as everybody was talking was the whole idea of something that came up a few years ago in a class, is there's a politics of memorials. The politics of memorials. The politics behind what memorial gets set up, what museum gets built, what statue gets placed. And if you study what's in Washington already and what has the most money and the most donations, you'll learn a lot about how the politics are going. So I think one of our most important things we have to think about is how politically we can gather together and create a force that will make something happen in Washington for us.
That's a very good point that you raised, and thank you for doing that. So the Department of Interior, as Maggie, you were mentioning, Secretary Salazar, now retired from that post, set up an American Latino Heritage Fund that focused solely on the creation of more monuments that portray or honor the American Latino history. And Miri Aponte is the director of that fund, and shared with me that only 2% of all the national monuments represent any minority or ethnic piece of history. So not 2% are Latino monuments, 2% of every ethnic and minority story that is told by an official U.S. monument. So that point is not lost. While we work for this American Latino Museum, there is an ongoing effort today to find and highlight more of national monuments that tell and honor American Latino history. And I think that if you have the time to do it, the American Latino Heritage Fund is a great organization to also look at, so we can tell these stories today. President Obama inaugurated the official Cesar Chavez monument just last year, just as an example of some of their great work. So let's start with some of the challenges that we have. We run the American Latino Museum social media page. We have 126,000 followers on Facebook, 140,000 followers on Twitter. We're not yet at the Justin Bieber numbers of the millions, but maybe one day we'll get to the Shakira numbers or something like that. But here's the interesting thing. While we assume that everyone that follows us is very excited about creating the museum, when we post historical stories, factoids, so many times we get immediate feedback saying, why don't they teach this in our schools? Why do I have to see this on Facebook and it's completely ignored in our classrooms? And I get this from teachers who say, this is great, I'm going to incorporate this in my curriculum. So not only are we trying to create this American Latino Museum to educate the broader American community, but we need to educate ourselves. As a panelist of professors, teachers, and those involved in media and museums, I'd love a few words from you on how do you begin that education process, understanding what the current climate is. I mean, look at Arizona and the Chicano Studies program, look at Texas with its challenges in some of their education programs. Politics is always going to be part of it. Let me stop there.
You know, I'm going to start. Everything that I hear, I'm a mathematician, and you should all say, whoa, what a weird person, okay? I'm a scientist, okay? The awards I win are good. Now, Jose Aranda and I joint taught Chicano Studies here at Rice. It was wonderful, okay, good. And in several books we looked where we started to brag about the Latino contribution, not our books, somebody else's, it never got to mathematics or science or physics. It was lawyers and doctors and everything. So the whole agenda, from where that point I see it, is that this component is ignored, okay? It's ignored. And yet, it's the backbone of America. I mean, science, engineering, STEM areas, we are the world leaders. Granted, we're being threatened. But that whole component, not only, it seems like it's not supposed to be under our jurisdiction or our representation. And that really bothers me. So what I'm going to say now is that, is it getting better? The first question that I was asked is, are we improving representation in STEM or in mathematics area among Latinos? And the answer is yes and no. The numbers may go up slow, but there's no improvement in those positions of power and leadership. For example, faculty at Tier 1 universities, okay? The numbers are worse than they were 20 years ago. 72 had the most Latino Ph.D.s in mathematics, 1972, okay? So we're not in positions where the leaders are taken from. If you pick somebody for the National Science Board, if you pick somebody for National Research Council, if you pick somebody for a university professorship at a Tier 1 university, like the 4 Tier 1 schools, we're not there. We're not there. So to me, when I say, how do we fight these issues of promoting more the pride, the history, I believe them. But it is so desperate that somehow we have totally lost this other component about how do we improve the situation. And so if I go in to give you the faculty numbers of domestic Latinos at UC System, Ivy Leagues, Tier 1 universities in the state of Texas, they're zeros. We're not there. If we're not there, and those are the places where leaders are picked from, then we won't be leaders, and we won't represent ourselves. When I was on the National Science Board, Clinton appointee, everybody used to say, underrepresentation minorities. Yes, this is DC. That means African Americans. No, 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 I said. Oh, yes, we understand. It's Puerto Rico, okay? African Americans in Puerto Rico, okay? And some stuff has been happening there. But to get to the rank and file southwest part of the country and representation in science and engineering in this huge area, people didn't understand it, and we don't. So they don't understand from the outside, we don't understand it from the inside. That's my special battle. And I have to come up with this or I'll get eaten up by these three people in history, okay? So.
I'm glad you raised that point. We posted recently about Dr. Ellen Ochoa, who was the first Latina astronaut, and now if someone knows the exact title, but now I believe she's the director of NASA. Thank you. So we applauded her and posted on Facebook, and the response was just pride. So Maggie, let me just turn it over to you.
I'm going to address kind of another part of that. Because I'd be curious to hear what Richard says about solutions to this. I teach journalism. I was a journalist for a long time, and I also teach like journalism history, oral history. When you look at a book on journalism history, for instance, and you look up how many Latinos are in this book, you're lucky if there's a paragraph. It's true for almost every kind of history book. The Latino contributions are maybe a paragraph. I can't even imagine that anyone has written an entire book about Latinos in mathematics. Maybe so.
They have, but they all come from Argentina.
Okay. That's another good point. I believe that one thing that has to happen is we need to incorporate our history into these things. And there's a long step. It's a long step, and it's not an overnight thing, usually. But one of the first steps is to get the raw material. I specialize in oral history. One thing that we do is we create the raw material, which are interviews, which then are cross-indexed, fact-checked against the other written books that have already come out. So that's really an important thing, but really there needs to be an oral history of Latino mathematicians, Latino scientists. I don't know that that's part of, I don't know where that would be, but it would be a great thing, and I would love to help work on that. But the other part is this. Incorporating this into our schools, our oral history project years ago, we created some school materials for grades 5 to 8. We hired teachers. We spent a lot of our own operating funds to do this oral history stuff. We put together a teacher guide of about 100 pages. We put together little trading cards with pictures and posters, beautiful stuff, beautifully designed. All were aligned to the TEKS. We gave it out to the 5th grade classrooms in Austin ISD. I had a 5th grader at the time. Only one classroom in all of the schools at ISD used them. And the reason for that is not that they were not TEKS aligned, because they were, and not that we didn't have support from the highest echelons, because we did. It has to be something that you have to cultivate the social studies councils at the state level and on the national level, and some of you are nodding your heads, you know all about this. You need to have a presence at these, you need to have panel discussions, you need to slowly integrate this in. And to do that, you need to have resources. And we, frankly, it's kind of like it was not something that we had the resources to do. But that's really one of the first things that has to happen. You need to be at the table at these places where they teach social studies at,
Right.
at K through 12.
And let me throw in there a perfect example. We worked with a team from California to highlight the Mendez v. Westminster case. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mendez v. Westminster, but it's basically the precedent case to Brown v. Board of Education. It really set the stage for that case, and so few people know anything about Mendez versus Westminster, and that became a whole campaign for this family that started at the local level, lobbied the state Congress, the state assembly, to get this case worked into the history curriculum. And from there, it became a larger national campaign. So I agree with you entirely. That's just a perfect example of the kind of work that needs to happen to tell those stories. Eduardo.
Well, if you Google the Smithsonian, you'll notice that it's si.edu. So the Smithsonian is an educational institution, just like rice.edu, for example. The mission of the Smithsonian is a very simple one. It is the increase and diffusion of knowledge. When James Smithson gave the grant 167 years ago to establish, or more, to establish the Smithsonian, that was the mission, and it still is the mission. The mission of the Latino Center is to do the same thing, but about the U.S. Latino experience, and so that's what we're committed to. I will tell you that as a museum, as we operate a museum, we operate 19 museums and 9 research centers, plus the National Zoo and Folklife Festival, and have a recording label as well, which just won a Grammy, by the way, for the Quetzal. It's a nice fusion Latino rock band. Anyway, enough commercials. Yes. Which the Latino Center supported. Our job is to support Latino projects throughout the institution, in addition to build the curatorial ranks as well. So when we do programming as a museum, or in the museum sort of style of work, it's critical, it's fundamental that accompanying the exhibitions are correlative public and educational programs to provide the necessary context, so that when people go into the exhibition, they get as much as they can from the experience, whether they visit it in a physical way, or whether they visit it virtually. I think also the Smithsonian, at least from our perspective at the Latino Center, is very involved with sort of the longer-term commitments that have to do with building what I will call the future leadership base that's going to drive the museum. And those are people. I was visiting, as I mentioned before, Talento Bilingüe de Houston. I also visited the Children's Museum here in Houston. And we place every summer in Houston 2 young ambassadors. These are kids from Houston, Latinos, from Houston, Harris County, I should say, who come to Washington in the summer and then spend a week with us, and then they go back out and do internships in institutions like TBH and like the Children's Museum, specifically here in Houston. We have them in Puerto Rico, New York, Boston, LA, et cetera. We're starting now to see, this is the 8th year of the program, we're starting now to see them graduating. And not that we brainwashed them or anything, but you know, we want them to start thinking about the Smithsonian as a place where they want to come and work. So for us, it's a matter of now building making the kind of investment, if you will, that's going to pay off in the long term. The other program is the Latino Museum Studies program, where we bring scholars, Ph.D. students, master's students and sometimes museum professionals to Smithsonian to have an experience there that also inspires them, we hope, to join our ranks as well. So I see it very much as a long-term commitment. In addition to the curatorial ranks and the people we hope that will fill them, because I'm not going to be around, forever. I may not be around even when the museum's established, but I mean, I just want to, say that, it's important for us to build this infrastructure while we're here and while we can do the good work we need to do. The issue of collections is very important. Content. The point that Richard was talking about, or the point that Maggie talked about, is why aren't we present in the textbooks? Why aren't we present in the oral histories, in the records of what is left behind? Well, we don't have in the museum world. We don't have the collections. We have to build the archives and the collections to be able to have the stuff to work with to present to our people and to the general audience as well, so that they have a fuller picture of what we're talking about in terms of our experience as American Latinos.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for painting that picture. The infrastructure is so important. And before I go to you, Profesora Hernandez, the experience that we have with our social media page is so telling for us in terms of taking the temperature of the Latino community. And one of the things that we also find is how fixed we are in what we believe the American Latino history to be. We believe it to be a certain way, and it's very difficult to move people when they are already committed to a certain belief. One of the things that we do just to get attention and get people talking during celebrations, during holidays, we'll post something about the real history behind Cinco de Mayo. We'll post something on St. Patrick's Day to talk about the Mexican and Irish collaboration in the Mexican-American War, things that people find interesting. And during holidays, we'll post something about the Virgen de Guadalupe and what she means. And then during Hanukkah, we posted something for the Latino Jewish community. Well, when I did that, I was flooded with posts, comments from supporters who said, Latinos aren't Jewish? And so here's our job. We are moderators in this social media world where we throw things out there and then we try to stop each other from replying to some of the things that people say. It's really a supporters, they police each other, and somebody will come back and say, you're very wrong. And others will say, you're just dumb. And so you watch this back and forth, and they teach each other. And we just sit back and watch. Professor, I wanted you to feed into that, because the book that you wrote actually dives into how diverse in our faith the Latino community is as well.
Oh, yes, you're talking about my third book.
Yes. Yes, the third.
I used to work a lot. I don't work so much. The title of that book, it's a work in it's a title in progress. It's already at the press, at Rutgers University Press. It's Fabulas, like fables, Fabulas of Devotion, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and the Jews. And it's about the presence of Jews at the highest levels of the church and the monarchy in Spain and Mexico during the colonial period. So I've got to turn everything in with all the footnotes in order next week. It's going to press. Well, there's several issues involved in that. There's looking for things and how you look for things, and then there's the issue of when you find something, what happens. Some of the biggest discoveries I've made were because I was looking in places they weren't supposed to be, like the 500 handwritten pages at the New York Public Library written by a priest who was a crypto Jew in 1825. And the papers ended up there because a guy that worked for Maximilian stole them and took them to Europe. And when he died, his heirs sold them at auction. But they ended up at the New York Public Library, and nobody knew they were there since 1880. So it's always looking for things in places you don't expect. And I'm always looking for Jewish things. I don't know, maybe it's a past life thing, who knows what it is, but I've got this thing for it. And then I did my DNA, and yes, it did turn out like that. But I was at the Alamo. My dad used to take us all the time. My dad was a World War II veteran, or he's still alive, but he has dementia now. But in his stronger days, he took us everywhere. I went to all the memorials, all the places. I went to Goliad. I went every place. And he would constantly tell me stories about Texas and Mexico. So on my probably 50th trip to the Alamo, which was about this one was maybe 5 or 7 years ago, I'm walking through the museum, and I saw these candelabras that looked kind of strange. And like I said, I'm always looking for telltale signs of something. And I started counting, because the Jewish menorah has either 7 or 9 candlesticks, right? And this one had 6. And I thought, okay, well then it's not. But then I looked at it some more, and the 7th one was bent over. It was bent down. And I said, holy smokes, there's something here. But I didn't do anything. I was kind of shy. I talked to a friend in Tel Aviv who was getting a Ph.D. from Hebrew University. She says, go back. Tell the people you've got to see it. Tell them to pull it out. You've got to do something. Don't just let it sit there. So it took a couple of years to get the courage, and I went back again. And I went to the counter, and I talked to one of the daughters of the Texas Republic, who was very nice. And I said, I don't usually like to say something like Jewish right away because some people really react. So I said, well, I wanted to ask you about the candelabras. And she says, oh, you mean the minarets, the menorahs. I said, oh, you knew what it was? Oh, yes, we've always known. But no one's ever written about it. No one has ever said anything. And she goes, well, yeah, no one has, but they were from the Veramendi house, who's the last governor of Texas y Coahuila. There were 2 of them, and they were taken out of the house after the Alamo fell. People took them out, and they ended up at the museum. And then later on, I did the genealogy, because now it's a lot easier to find out things. And I did find out that at least Veramendi's mother was from northern Mexico, and as many of you probably know, it is a common publicly known story that the original settlers, European settlers of northern Mexico were Portuguese Jews, in fact. So it's very likely that this was possible. But the most interesting thing to me, even more than finding them, and by the way, I did look them up, and I found some identical ones that were from a synagogue in Poland in 1889. Identical, all the same little things. When I talked to the Jewish education people about it, I have a lot of contact with them now, they said, oh, no. It's not a 9. And these are nice people I like a lot that I work with. But they said, no, it doesn't have 9. I said, but some people use 7, but it doesn't have 9. Okay. Well, maybe somebody just dropped it off at their house. Maybe they didn't really use it. Maybe they maybe had garage sales then, who knows? But everyone's telling me that almost everyone I've talked to says there's no way of knowing for sure that Veramendi really used these. So that's the biggest issue.
Well, and that's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. Those undiscovered stories really are what keep us excited as well in terms of how we continue to share these stories, educate our base of supporters, but others as we go from city to city like this. And as Dr. Tapia was saying, we need to do this in all areas. STEM is a perfect example. It's now the thing that everyone talks about, right? There's organizations that give money, that foundations and scholarships for STEM. There are 26 or 16,000 jobs that are created every month and go unfulfilled because there's no proper training in those STEM fields. But yet, our Latino community, I mean, we should celebrate the celebrations we do have. Highest high school graduation rate this last year in 2012, highest Latino college enrollment numbers in the fall of 2012. So we've got great stories to tell as well.
We're moving forward, but here's where we got to get.
Oh, yes.
I mean, yeah, sure. I often tell Rice people, I wasn't planning on saying this, but I say, so the department has no underrepresented minority or women, okay? 0 to 1 is infinite improvement, okay? 0 to 1. You can't do any better. You have 1. I mean, 1 to 2 is just 100%, okay? So the thing is, it's got to be the whole package, not just, oh, we got a little bit better, okay? It's where was the rest of the world? Now, one of the things that I want to share the story, and in fact, Terry made me think of it, is that there's an incredible elitism, okay, in other words, and that's among, elitism in various positions in universities, certainly Rice faculty, Tier 1 faculty. the museums, the Smithsonian has to work with the youth. The youth is the salvation. If we grow the youth to understand that, look, we belong there and we're there. You can't work with established people. You just have to hold on. I recently was on, I was the first Hispanic ever elected to the National Academy of Engineering. And I worked with the president very closely. And we tried to change some things. And he said, Richard, we've tried and we failed. And then he said, you know what? We are making progress, but it's one death at a time, okay? Nah. The youth has to be pulled in. So I have a lot of youth that will send me emails and we do things and stuff like that. But I want to say a story. When I want to tell a story to all of you. This is an important story for me. So I won a bunch of minority awards. I won SACNAS Award, the Hispanic Award, this award. And the chair of our department at the first meeting when all the graduate students were there and all the faculty were there says, Richard Tapia continues to win all the minority awards, but the important awards were won over here by somebody else, okay? So this was said to the graduate students and to everybody. So he was essentially trying to create an understanding on the graduate students that that wasn't an important issue. All my life I've done that, okay, all my life. So finally I share, my wife's over there, so we went to the White House and I won the National Medal of Science. And I'll say two little things about it that was really important. So I looked at Jean, and she looked at me, and we've been married over 50 years. Jean, we won a White Award. This is a White Award. They're not going to cut that. They're not going to cut that. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, congratulations on your White Award, okay? But then President Obama came out, and there's two quick things, okay? First of all, they said at the White House, nobody yell. President Obama does not like yelling. So my sweet wife, when I came out and he came out, yelled as loud as she could. She goes, yay, okay. So I looked at President Obama and I said, look, you have to understand, she's Puerto Rican. All Puerto Ricans yell, okay? And he looked at me and said, yes, Richard, I understand. But here's what President Obama said as he gave out the awards. He says, there's 7 of you that have all done great research. And then he singled me out. And he said, but Richard Tapia has given in dimensions that are critical to the country. So the rest of you researchers should think about changing the culture of your discipline and try to do more outreach activities that are going to improve what's important for this country. Then I looked at Jean and I said, I know why we won. See, those things have to be promoted among the youth.
I'm going to set the stage now because we're going to run out of time and we want to get some questions from you. And I said to the panelists earlier, we're going to run out of time, and both sides are going to sit there going, there's so much more that we need to talk about. So I apologize up front. But I want to talk about what we've kind of been hinting at, which is the education portrayal of the Latino community today. What's absent in history. And Maggie, because of your work in journalism, the media has a huge role to play. The media, both print, television, radio, they have a huge role to play in how the Latino community is portrayed, how we talk about our leaders, lack of leaders, and how the next generation views us. I think we've turned a corner, but let's talk about a little bit about the portrayal and the responsibility media has.
Back in the day, my generation, women, people in their mid to late 50s, we were like the first critical mass of journalists, of Latino journalists. And when we got into the business, there was so much work to do that it was like 100% increase. You know, I was the first Hispanic reporter at the Boston Globe. And they never hired one until I turned in my resignation, and then they said, we got to take you out to lunch and figure out how to get a Hispanic here. Right now, the way journalism is right now, unfortunately, there's less of an emphasis on diversity because newspapers and television stations and radio stations are really in survival mode. And that means that some stories that would have gotten reported or should have gotten reported aren't always making it because it's right now, really, it's not the big priority. But there's pressure on all sides, and there's something that I hope that that if you're not in journalism, I hope that you will listen to this. A letter to the editor carries a lot of weight. Newspapers get scared when they get a letter to the editor. Oh my God, somebody's responding to this. So we really need, there's a lot of times when you'll see a story where the only time that you'll see a Latino in there is if it's about Latinos. It's as if we don't have Mother's Days. We're not mothers, we're not fathers, we're not. So one thing that we try to tell our students is to include people of different ethnicities in all of our reporting, so that it's not just you're doing a story about World War II and you just think about, the white World War II veteran, but you think of more broadly. So that's one part of it, but really and truly, there's pressure that you can bring in from inside, but there's a lot of pressure that's brought in from outside, and it really takes pressure on all levels for things to finally make a difference. And so I'm hoping, I really have seen a lot of improvement. I've seen a lot of improvement in the years that I've been teaching journalism, practicing journalism, but there's always, it's like that one story that you read in the paper, you're just like, oh my God, why do they do that? It turns your stomach, it makes you mad, you write a letter to, you send an email to somebody, but it's like a never-ending thing. It's a never-ending. One thing that I have gives me a lot of hope is Twitter, Facebook. Social media really is opening a lot of avenues that we didn't have available to us. And so a lot of young people, they're kind of like they're like circumventing the traditional media, and they're not getting their news so much from traditional media. And especially like some of my Latino students, they feel like they can find out more and learn more about the Latino experience from looking up different Facebook sites and different bloggers. So it's really
well, and to that point, Maggie, we now see that the social media and online media continues to look for ways to attract the Latino community, and not just online but television. So ABC's marrying Univision to create Fusion. Fox has not only created Fox Latino but Mundo Fox. I'm not sure what other, maybe they'll come up with Hispanic or Chicano Fox, but they keep trying to find new ways. And so on and on. So there's definitely new mediums out there, and it's interesting to see what they're putting out there to engage the Latino community.
Actually, I don't want to say anything more than I've already said about the Smithsonian, because I think that's sort of what it is. I kind of like cede my time to the public.
That's fine. Yeah. Before we take the first question, I want to just highlight one of the challenges we have with the American Latino Museum is that there are those on Capitol Hill that will say that to create another museum, and when they say another, they're referring to the National Museum of African American History. To create another museum that focuses on one community further segments our country and our national mall. That why do we need another museum that just a museum that just focuses on the American Latino history? Why not create a National Immigrant Museum, which is a proposal that's currently on the Hill, and it's gaining some traction, but I honestly believe it's gaining traction because there are people that are opposed to our museum, so they're trying to do this. And what we've tried to do is explain the fallacy in your argument is that you assume that we're immigrants. And that's where you're wrong. And that's why we can't support that. The history classes, and I love you weighing on this, history classes, as I was taught I grew up in Northern Virginia, were taught basically this way. Civilization came with the Pilgrims, and as they moved west, they built these fancy societies and civilizations as they got to the opposite coast. And I know so many people who believe that's how they were taught as well. And the truth is, there were churches and cathedrals and palaces and missions in Texas years before any of the Pilgrims even began to set foot. Those are the stories that we're trying to tell. And in facing that challenge, because we'll continue to get pushback, that, well, then you're only going to have Latinos going to the Latino Museum and only African Americans go to the African American Museum. And I try to use the analogy that, well, when you go to these these diversity food courts where there's Korean food and Vietnamese food and Mexican food and on and on. Who do you see in those lines? Do you only see Koreans in the Korean food court? I mean, really, that's what we're talking about. So let me end with that question to you. How do you address those that say we're further segmenting the country in our national museums?
Well, that's going to come up very often. I mean, it's a common thing. Like when I was doing a lot of photography and I would be in a show for Latino photographers, I would get complaints from people that weren't Latino. And say, well, you know, why are you getting this special attention? But what it reminds me of is one thing I found for my cemetery book, because I ran across this story of a guy named Vicente Cordova. And Vicente Cordova was, they called it the Cordova Revolt. It was right after 1836. And he had been born in East Texas. His family had been there several generations already. It was one of the first settlements that came up from Mexico to East Texas. And what he did was he got together with some other people that lived there and some Creek Indians, and they started a revolt. And they had all these guys that fought in the Texas Revolution going crazy for 9 months. They went all over the state of Texas and ended up north of Austin, I believe. And they couldn't catch these guys. And they didn't kill them either. They just kept going and going and going. But nobody knows that he did this. He was able to outsmart them for that long, and it's not in any history book at all. And so what I think is important to come back with is say, how about stories like this? If we don't do something, Vicente Cordova's story is not going to be told. I went to Nacogdoches recently to see what was going to be there, and there was nothing in their museum that said that they had done this. And this was an amazing feat, to go 9 months without being caught. It's something to think about.
Definitely.
I just wanted to add one of the great challenges, of course, is our diversity, but I think one of the great opportunities is that diversity. And that's, I think, where we have a real sort of competitive advantage, if you will, as we build institutions in Washington, and that is that we are everybody. We're of course, Native. We are, of course, African. We are, of course, Asian. We are, of course, European. We are, of course, Muslim. We are, of course, Jew. We are, of course, Catholic. We are, et cetera, lesbian, gay, straight, so forth. You know, it's remarkable. We're working with the Asian Pacific American Center at the Smithsonian on a project that's looking at, for example, the ties historically between the Asian Pacific American communities and the Latino communities. And guess what? I mean, the number of untold stories. I mean, think about it. So the Spaniards started the Manila galleons in, 1565? So there was 250 years of active trans-Pacific trade route. You know, a hell of a lot can happen in 250 years between Manila and Acapulco, for God's sake. So, I mean, a lot of things that we consider, quote, Mexican would not exist but for that travel. China Poblana, hello, I mean, you know, papel picado, we wouldn't have mangoes, for God's sakes. So, I mean, you know, we have, these are the great, this is our great competitive advantage. We are everybody. And that everybody needs to be reflected in whatever it is that we do, right?
Definitely honor the mango. I agree with you. Maggie?
I always say, where we're sitting right now, this used to be Mexico. Without going any further than that, that has been a huge part of our American history. We haven't acknowledged it always, and we haven't always understood it, but it did set the stage for a lot that came afterwards. So I just, you know, to me, the story of the Latino, and I like the idea of broadly Latino, not just Mexican American, because I like the pan-Latino approach. But the fact that we're here, that used to be Mexico, that's something that should be honored. And it's that story is not often understood.
Yep.
Even our college kids, it's kind of like I'll say something like that to them, and I'll say, well, of course, and this used to be Mexico, and they have this look of total confusion on their faces. And it takes them a little while to remember way back maybe Texas history. Then finally, it's like se les prende el foco. But it's something that really, it really is a part of us, and it's something that we should honor.
Definitely. We are way over time, but I do want to at least take one or two questions, and I hope anybody who's got babysitters out there can text them or tell them we're running late. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, please. I don't know if we have a microphone. We do have a microphone.
We should do
yes?
that. We should have a mic.
All right, well, I want to make sure that the folks in the back here. So actually, just take this microphone, please. Thank you.
My name is Ray Gutierrez. You know, we talk about the dilemmas and the political power that we don't have. You know, and all the, she mentioned just a few seconds ago about the American history or the American dilemma. We are who we are today. The people in these rooms right now are the people that are moving forward. We need to find a way to get other people, such as the inclusion of all, to be able to develop this program. Our history is our future. And what we need to do, we talked about STEM. We talked about the responsibility of young adults becoming mature adults. We're missing legacies now, trying to figure out how to bridge that divide and make that work, because we are the future and we are the past. We just got to figure out how to start. When you talked about starting from 2 or 3 years old, that's the beginning. And that needs to start, and that's consistent throughout. But we don't have the political power to make that happen right now. How do we find that? Where do we look for it? Why don't we bond together as a team like most others do?
Does anybody want to respond to that one?
Yeah.
Well, what I want to respond to say is that we do have political power. They're telling
Wait, you're going to get a microphone.
They're telling us we're the largest. They're telling us we're the largest majority minority group in the country now. So and also to respond to Estuardo's previous question, what we got to say, we have to stand up and say no. We are not going to be ignored anymore. We're not going to be put aside anymore. We're not expendable. We're not marginal. So to the question will the Latino Museum further balkanize the United States? The people who are putting out those questions actually want to limit us and retain us in some kind of amnesia pocket, national amnesia. And that's not right, and they're also fearful of our political power. What we have to do more consistently is to look to ourselves, whether we're Democrats or Republicans or independents, and recognize that we're more likely to work with each other than those other parties are likely to work with each other. They've already established that they can work together. But we haven't had a chance to work together. And I think if you put Democrats, Republicans, and independents of Latino descent, Hispanic descent to work together to fix problems, the problems will get fixed.
Mm-hmm. We'll take one more question. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I think so many have been working here in Houston, and first of all, I at a national level, I think a lot of people do not recognize Houston as a Latino city, even though it is. And one of the things that I've been hearing right now is the stories that have not been told. My question pertains to the stories of those young people that are now incredibly doing some fantastic work now. Latinas in medicine, Latinas in law, Latinas in engineering, and maybe it's because I'm a Latina, that I have been recognizing these incredible feats that they've been able to accomplish. So my question to you is, what would be the best method to introduce those stories now as they're being developed, as opposed to waiting till that one death?
Well, you know, one of the things that you do, I would ask, locally acknowledge them. Let's say someone in school, like here, our students are doing great things, and we make sure that we try to acknowledge them locally. Then maybe a newspaper will come in and do some things, okay? And sometimes they do come in, but I think it starts at home by taking. And one of the things that I have found is that awards and acknowledgments essentially add credibility to the activity and motivate the people, okay? When I first won an award at Cornell, our president was Malcolm Gillis, and he said, "Wow, Richard, Cornell gave you this award." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, you're really walking in tall cotton, okay? And from then on, it was easy to deal with him. So the thing is that I think that make sure that we don't wait. When I'm in Houston, Texas, I don't wait for the media because they're not going to come. I do it myself, and I call, and I say this and this, this. When I won the National Medal of Science, my sister called me from L.A. Richard, you were on Jay Leno, and you were in the news meeting. Jean's sister called me from Florida. I was on nothing in Houston. See? And I just said, yeah, that's Houston. Okay, so you do the thing first and make sure. Today, I was really being concerned as I was driving in that some of our students had graduated here with Ph.D., some of our minority students. And I don't think that I had recognized them enough, so I'm going to make sure for that. So I say start, then it'll catch on, everybody will start doing it, and then hopefully, but I don't worry about the big picture because it's too hard to control.
Maggie?
I hope that you'll think of doing this, because if you videotape interviews with all of these women, very in-depth interviews, the more details, the better, and archive these at a public repository, Rice, University of Houston, someplace like that, that will be the raw material that somebody can do the research with.
Yeah.
When Ed was talking about needing the raw material, that's the raw material we're talking about, because when you have that raw material, you have the documentation, this is what you need to write those journal articles and to write those books.
That's good.
And really and truly, the more books we write, the more we just keep on slamming, writing journal articles and more books and more books and more books.
Right.
It's not about a competition.
You're right.
There cannot just be one book about Latina engineers. There should be 20 books about Latina engineers. And whoever writes that second book is not the competitor of the first person.
Yeah.
We need all the books on the bookshelves. So that's how you start to have the critical mass. But really and truly creating those interviews, and not just interviews, but any kind of paperwork, any kind of documentation you have, certificates, diaries are great, photographs are great. That's the raw material. That's what we need to work with.
Eduardo?
I was just going to say that, in response to your question about what to do about the youth voice, right? So it has to be very much a first voice, right? Because it's their voice, not interpreted by somebody of an older generation. It strikes me, I mean, just sort of taking a page out of Maggie's book, when she started the program that was documenting the lives of Latino veterans, for example, that's an important niche of our community. And it took her efforts at the University of Texas at Austin to be able to establish a program that was all about oral histories. I did that because my father, 93, is a World War II veteran as well, and told the story. My mother also worked in the Department of War, which was before the Defense Department. But I'm thinking that perhaps some other university, perhaps could be Rice, whatever, could start some sort of an oral history project that is really focused on the voice of Latino youth, right? And the challenge there, of course, and the advantage, here's where Houston, I think, has a real competitive advantage. I think, and y'all can correct me from Houston, but it strikes me that Houston, above all of the Latino cities, because 40%, right, Latino, probably the most diverse Latino community anywhere. I'd say probably even more diverse than New York. And, that's your strength. So I think if you're going to be, I think Houston has a competitive advantage in that way to represent not only the youth voice, but the diverse youth voice that's Latino.
Professora, do you have anything to add?
Rock and roll.
I know there's another question, but we are way over time, and so I'm going to have to actually end and allow you to approach the panel maybe directly. But we're not supposed to be in this room now, so everybody hide.
But
That's it. They're coming. They're coming for us. So I want to thank our panel, and I want to invite everybody to seriously walk away from this with an action item. AmericanLatinoMuseum.org. Find us on Twitter. Sign up for our listserv. We'll keep you posted. This conversation has to continue on your own here in Houston and wherever else you visit.
That's good.
Because eventually we'll need you to call your senator, your congressman, and say, please support the Smithsonian American Latino Museum Act. We need you to vote for it. we need to move forward with the creation of an American Latino Museum on the National Mall that will inspire the youth and all of those that need to understand what our shared American history is about. Thank all of you for your time. I'm going to take a quick picture of you for my social media. You look great. You look great. Thank you very much, Sir Rice.
Okay.
Hey, Francis, how you doing? Good. Hey. Yeah. Oh, here you go.
Maybe it was